Greetings. Welcome to the recorded lecture for ENG 220, week 4. There are a few things that I want to say first before I start the lecture. First, I hope all is going well with your journal report. Remember that you must keep a writer's journal. It is going to be of immense help to you in writing your stories. And I'll be sending the instructions for story 1 with the course materials for week 5. So that is Sunday or Monday, next Sunday or Monday. Today we shall discuss the requirements for making your character complex, psychologically, physically, and in terms of general narrative structure. We will be following Linda Anderson. Let me just get the page numbers. 75 to 83, pages 75 to 83. Now, let me just introduce the topic of character development with a metaphor. There is a metaphor that's often used to describe the way details constitute a character in a literary work. And this metaphor comes from painting. The actual metaphor is brushstrokes. That is the way the artist uses the brush in order to create a portrait or an effect or an impression in a painting. People will describe, and this is a common metaphor. So we talk about a character or a literary work being painted with fine brushstrokes, short brushstrokes, long brushstrokes, broad brushstrokes. It's a metaphor, so people know they're not talking about a painter. But the use of really fine detail to describe your character might be described as the use of fine brushstrokes. The use of very general terms to describe your character might be described as rather broad brushstrokes. For example, you might simply say of your character, she had this coloured hair, wore these kinds of clothes, drove this kind of car, for example. Nothing more, nothing about her inner life, for example, no details of her appearance. Now you would say that this character was painted with broad brushstrokes. You might have another character, on the other hand, where the detail is really fine. You might talk about the little scar on the side of their face. You might talk about certain habits that this character has of closing his eyes whenever he's making a certain kind of statement or thinking about a certain kind of thing. You might have other reflexes and other details. So we would say in this case that this character is painted with fine brush strokes. So in developing your character, remember that in a way you're painting a portrait. For example, if you are basing a character in a story on someone you know or even on yourself, remember that whatever else you do, you need to bring the character to life. And it is detail, brushstrokes, that support this life. This is regardless of whatever kind of actions those characters may perform. Now, I want to talk a little bit about conflict and inconsistency. So I'll talk about conflict and inconsistency, imperfections and inconsistencies, and then techniques for creating your character. Now, perfection in literature is not perfection. A character must be flawed, no matter how heroic, beautiful, or good. In the first ever philosophical work on literature, Aristotle's Poetics, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, argues for the importance of change of fortune in the development of a character. That is, in Greek tragedy, which is what he was writing about, for a character and a plot to succeed, a good person in good circumstances must, through no fault of his or her own, come upon hard times. While the actions that lead to the demise are not triggered by anything they have done consciously, it happens as the plot unfolds that the flaws in the psychological makeup of the character begin to contribute to their downfall. The idea being that readers or audiences can identify with characters whose beauty, intellect, morality, and so on are flawed, as is the case with all human life. Conflict. You need to work to set a character against something. And so arises a clearer view of who and what they are. The conflict can be internal or external. It can be a conflict of desire. For example, I want this thing so very badly, but I also want the other thing. Such a character may not be able to decide. Indeed, the reader may not be able to decide. And so the character destroys him or herself in trying to have both or neither, while we read on, fascinated by the destruction of another. So these kinds of flaws, these kinds of conflicts, in fact, draw us in and give the character momentum, impetus. Now, I want to talk about imperfection. So that's conflict, yeah? Imperfection. Some slight imperfection or inconsistency, a light scar on the face, asymmetry of body or asymmetry of mind, some weakness or inability to act consistently pulls the reader in. These things both open the character to the reader and also to development. An unfinished, flawed character is one that is open to development, and development is the machine that drives narrative. Let's go to activity 5.4. This is on page 75 of Linda Anderson. Here, Anderson suggests we look at somebody's face or bring a face to mind. Seek out some imperfection, like an asymmetry of the features. Asymmetry meaning one side of the body is slightly different to the other side of the body. For most of us, our noses are a little bit crooked, for different reasons. But it's a slight asymmetry, a slight imperfection, you might say. Maybe, for example, somebody's ear, one ear is longer or bigger than the other ear. Maybe the eyes are not quite on the same level. Maybe they look in slightly different directions. There's very real pathos in life's imperfections. And for this, in literature, one of the things that we want to create is pathos, that is intense feeling. Going back to conflict in the character, read the passage about the traffic warden on page 76 of Anderson. The person is both highly bureaucratic in his or her official attitude and at the same time lyrical in their character. There is some inner conflict in the character, but the combination of these two generates an instantly interesting character because she or he must combine two elements that are, on the surface at least, incompatible. This can lead to new types of personality, literary personality, permanent and unresolved conflict of desire, tragedy, or unpredictability. Paradoxically, these incompatibilities generate what we call a fullness of character. Developing your character. Let's look now at ways in which these general structures may find their way into the development of your character. Linda Anderson in her book identifies 5 aspects of character portrayal where we can focus on the details. She identifies interpretation, appearance, thought, and speech. She also identifies action, but I'm going to leave action out because I want to take that up at another time. Let's look first at interpretation. The narrator or another character tells the reader what the character is like, which qualities they have, and where they might be lacking. The first technique where the narrator describes the character is the most efficient. See page 78 for this. But there are reasons too for wanting the characters themselves to do some of the work. When character, this is an example, when character number 1 describes character number 2, we inevitably learn something about both characters. And I want you to see page 79, Anderson's example of Barbara's terrible description of Sue. In this description, Barbara lets us know for certain that Sue has certain qualities. She is perhaps not sophisticated socially and linguistically, or, as Barbara thinks, she is just a boring person, whatever that means. My reading of this paragraph is that while Sue may be unsophisticated, Barbara is a kind of assassin, a kind of character assassin, a person who sets out deliberately to harm others, not for any objective reason, but because she gets from it some kind of emotional satisfaction. Appearance. A character in a story has a body, even if it is just of the fictional type. That is, much of what we come to know of a character comes from physical appearance. The surface is everything in this respect, even though in real life we don't normally accept this as a principle. We insist that the body is superficial and real depth lies in our emotions, our thoughts, our ethics, morality, and so forth. It is a good idea to give your character some physical difference, that is, a physical flaw or a blemish, as they say. Perhaps a character has eyebrows that are not even. Question, and this is referring to the examples on page 78 and 79. What does Palipana look like? What does Sue look like? And what does Barbara look like? Remember, Palipana is an archaeologist who has somehow lost some aspect of her personality. And Sue and Barbara we've already talked about. I see Barbara as tall with long dark hair. She's good looking rather than beautiful. Certainly she has a loud voice, but there is something she tries very hard to hide, and that is the fact that one of her ears is much longer than the other. Now we have a story. Thought. Thoughts of a character give us their inner lives. A character who does not express thoughts, beliefs, opinions, fears and hopes is an empty character. Thought is everything. Speech. I want you to become collectors of speech. Types of speech, dialects, ways of expressing, metaphor. Okay? I used to live in a city where I loved the way the people spoke. They spoke English with a sing-songy accent. When I was at the doctor's clinic waiting to see the doctor, or in a shop buying the bread, I noted the speech. I noted the way people spoke and what they said. I went home and I write it. I still have these speeches. I love them. I read them often. Maybe one day they'll find their way into a literary work. Goodbye.